Are you from Jacksonville?
Can I ask what I'm being down here for?
I'm going to tell you that in just a second. Are you from Jacksonville?
Can I ask what I'm being down here for?
I'm going to go over that with you in just a minute.
I need to ask what I'm down here for.
You're going to be down here. We're doing a homicide investigation, and you're down here part of a homicide investigation that we're conducting.
And what is this, sir?
Let me show you some pictures of what we're talking about. You know what that is?
No, sir.
You don't know what that is? Bibby ring a bell to you?
I don't speak with my lawyer.
You want to speak with your lawyer?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
It's going to be a bit. We're going to be out there doing some paperwork. You do have a warrant for your arrest.
We have a warrant for your arrest for murder today.
What?
Yes.
For what?
You want your lawyer, so I can't tell you no more, but you'll be in trouble.
What the hell?
The streets of Jacksonville. On January 15th, 2020, the streets of Jacksonville, Florida, were restless. The city, known for its sprawling neighborhoods and tense rivalries, had been simmering under an ongoing wave of violence tied to local cliques and the rap scene that surrounded them. Police officers patrolled with their radios crackling, familiar with the rhythm of gunfire reports that too often came across dispatch. That night, a life was about to end. Charles McCormick Jr., just 23 years old. To his family, he was Lil Buck, a young man with a smile that lit up photos and a future still unwritten. He had no idea that he was being followed. Prosecutors later said that Hakeem Ksoo Robinson, a Jacksonville rapper with a rising profile, was in another vehicle nearby with his cousin, Leroy ATK, Scotty Whitaker. Witnesses and cooperating testimony pieced together what happened. Cars trailing, sudden movements, and then the eruption of gunfire. When it was over, Lil Buck was dead. The killing would spark one of Jacksonville's most closely watched trials in years, not only because of who was accused, but because of who would testify. For the first time in memory, a father took the stand against his son in a murder case that had already captivated both the music world and a community exhausted by violence. By the summer of 2025, the story of Ksoo, once an up-and-coming artist, now convicted of first-degree murder, had become a chilling example of how art, loyalty, and street feuds can collide with devastating consequences. For more videos like this, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. This is that story, the making of Ksoo. Hakeem Armani Robinson was born in Jacksonville, Florida. In the late 1990s, he grew up in a city that was big in size, but small in opportunity for many of its young residents. Jacksonville was no stranger to violence. Local reporters often described it as one of Florida's most dangerous cities. By the time Robinson was a teenager, gunfire was a familiar sound in his community. Music was an outlet. Like many young men in Jacksonville, Robinson gravitated toward rap. He wasn't just listening, he was creating. By his late teens, he had started recording under the name K. So, aligning himself with the ATK collective, ATK Aces Top Killers, sometimes just called ATK, was a rap crew tied to Youngeen Ace, one of Jacksonville's most prominent rappers. Ksoo's style was raw. His tracks featured heavy beats, aggressive lyrics, and a delivery that carried the weight of lived street experiences. To fans, it felt authentic. To critics, it blurred too closely with the realities of Jacksonville's violent feuds. Some of his music videos racked up views on YouTube. His name became known in local hip-hop circles, not just for his music, but for his presence in ongoing disputes. Reporters later noted that the city's rap scene was deeply intertwined with neighborhood rivalries. Diss tracks, songs insulting rival rappers or crews weren't just entertainment. In Jacksonville, they sometimes became preludes to violence. Lines in a song could spark retaliation. By 2019, Hakeem Robinson had a reputation. He was talented, unpredictable, and closely associated with a crew that had enemies. He wasn't yet a national name, but among Florida rap fans, Ksoo was on the rise. The other side, Charles "Lil Buck" McCormick. While Robinson was building his music career, Charles McCormick Jr. was carving out a different life. Known by family and friends as Little Buck, Charles was remembered as outgoing, funny, and loyal to the people close to him. His mother later described him in court as a bright light whose absence would leave an unfillable void. McCormick was only 23 when his life ended. To many who knew him, he wasn't a headline or a name in a police file. He was a son, a brother, a young man who had the ordinary dreams of someone just beginning adulthood. But Jacksonville's street rivalries didn't spare anyone. Investigators and prosecutors later tied McCormick's killing to disputes involving local rap cliques. Whether he was a central figure or simply caught in the middle, his life was claimed by a feud larger than any one person. Jacksonville's violent reputation didn't happen overnight. For years, the city ranked high in Florida's homicide statistics. The dynamic was complicated. Poverty, turf conflicts, and music rivalries all collided in neighborhoods where young men faced few options and plenty of risks. Police had long recognized the connection between rap feuds and shootings. Local reporters had covered multiple cases in which songs or online videos seemed to provoke violence. The community was divided. Some residents saw rap music as fueling the cycle, while others argued it was just a reflection of what was already happening. Into this atmosphere stepped Akeem Robinson, a young rapper whose music carried both the promise of fame and the danger of association. He had a growing platform, but also a growing list of enemies. By early 2020, those tensions were about to explode. The morning of January 15, 2020, was ordinary for Charles McCormick Jr. He was 23 years old, still in the midst of figuring out where his life was going. Friends called him Lil Buck, a nickname he had carried since childhood. To those who loved him, he was more than a name in a headline. Family members later described Charles as outgoing, loyal, and always willing to lend a hand. In photos shown at his funeral and later referenced in court, he wore the wide smile that his mother called his bright light. He had grown up in Jacksonville, a city where most young men understood the weight of local rivalries, even if they weren't directly involved. That evening, Charles was in the Arlington neighborhood of Jacksonville. Investigators pieced together what happened next from ballistics, surveillance, and cooperating witnesses. Prosecutors said neighbors told police they heard multiple shots ring out, sharp and sudden. When officers arrived, they found Charles McCormick fatally wounded. He died there at the scene. He would never make it home. The aftermath, a family shattered. News of Charles's death spread quickly. His family gathered in shock, grappling with the sudden void. His mother later told the courtroom, during sentencing, that losing her son was like losing a part of herself. She described him as a bright light extinguished too soon, a life full of promise and ordinary moments that would now never happen. Birthdays, holidays, simple phone calls. During the trial, prosecutors emphasized the human cost. They showed photos of Charles smiling, photos from family gatherings. Jurors heard from loved ones who remembered him as more than just a victim of gang or rap rivalries. For the family, the case wasn't about music, cliques, or viral fame. It was about Charles, a son who never came home. The killing of Charles "Lil Buck" McCormick wasn't random. Prosecutors tied it to Jacksonville's ongoing cycle of retaliatory violence, much of it connected to rap crews and neighborhood allegiances. By 2020, the city's homicide rate was among the highest in Florida. Shootings tied to young men under 25 had become so common that police units tracked social media posts, YouTube videos, and Instagram accounts in an effort to predict the next eruption of violence. To detectives, McCormick's murder was another tragic marker in a war that had claimed too many lives already. To his family, it was personal devastation. The victim's voice in court, when the case finally went to trial years later, the courtroom paused to hear from McCormick's family. His mother, in a statement read aloud, told the jury and the defendants, "You took away my son, my baby. His life mattered. He had people who loved him, who still loved him. We will never stop grieving him." Her words were raw, echoing across the silent courtroom. Reporters in attendance noted jurors, looking down, some appearing visibly moved. It was a reminder that behind the legal strategies and public fascination was a family in mourning. For them, Charles wasn't a symbol of a feud or a footnote in Jacksonville's rap scene. He was their son, gone forever. Closing the chapter, the death of Charles "Lil Buck" McCormick Jr. is the heartbeat of this case. Without him, there would be no trial, no headlines, no father testifying against his own son. His murder set in motion years of investigations, courtroom battles, and public debate. But before the lawyers, the jurors, and the appeals, there was simply a young man struck down in the middle of his life. His death was both personal tragedy and public spectacle, a reminder of how violence erases futures and leaves families clinging to memory. The date was January 15th, 2020. Wednesday at 10:37 a.m. in Jacksonville, Florida, Charles "Lil Buck" McCormick Jr., just 23 years old. A witness told investigators that Charles had just left out of an interview with her for a job at the temp service. Not long after he left, she heard gunshots and seen Charles running away from a man in a black and gray hoodie that was chasing him while shooting an assault rifle at him. Charles McCormick fell, and the man stood over him and continued to fire. She called 911, and after the man left, she went to check on Charles and noticed that his face was blown off. Others also proceeded to call 911. The dispatcher's log recorded multiple calls in seconds. Shots fired, Arlington Road. Sounds like automatic gunfire. By the time officers arrived, Charles McCormick laid lifeless in the parking lot. He had been shot multiple times. He died before medics could even begin life-saving measures. Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, JSO officers, swarmed the area. They secured the street, marked the shell casings, and began canvassing witnesses. Patrol officers traced bullet patterns. Detectives arrived minutes later, one of them muttering that the scene looked like a targeted hit, not random. From the start, investigators suspected more than just a street robbery gone wrong. The sheer number of rounds fired, the coordination of the hit, and how Charles was caught completely off guard, all pointed to planning. Witnesses reported seeing multiple people in another car following McCormick's Altima shortly before the shots rang out. But one neighbor remembered seeing two silhouettes in hoodies step out. Flashes of light from their hands, then the sound of rapid fire. Within 24 hours, detectives began connecting the dots. They knew McCormick's killing bore the marks of ongoing disputes between local rap-affiliated crews. In Jacksonville, investigators had been tracking escalating violence tied to cliques like a TK and KTA, where rap lyrics and diss tracks often reflected real-life tensions. Surveillance video from businesses near the crime scene showed a car believed to be trailing the Altima just before the shooting. Investigators traced it back to known associates of AT. By late January, Hakeem Ksoo Robinson, his name, was circulating among detectives as a possible suspect. On March 13, 2020, Jacksonville police arrested Robinson and charged him with second-degree murder in the death of Charles McCormick. Months later, after presenting evidence to a grand jury, prosecutors elevated the charge to first-degree murder. His cousin, Leroy ATK Scotty Whitaker, was also arrested and charged in connection with the killing. At a press conference, police framed the arrests as part of their broader effort to combat a cycle of violence. "This is about accountability," one official said. "We are seeing young men losing their lives, and we're seeing young men throwing their lives away." In court filings and later at trial, the state laid out its theory. They argued that Robinson and Whitaker had planned to kill Charles McCormick as part of a feud. They cited witness testimony, surveillance footage, and forensic evidence that tied Robinson to the vehicle and the scene. Perhaps the most explosive element came later. Robinson's own father, Abdul Robinson Sr., agreed to testify for the prosecution, saying he had knowledge of his son's involvement. It was an extraordinary turn, a parent taking the stand against his own child in a murder case. To the community, McCormick's death was both a tragedy and a familiar story. Another young man dead, another family broken, another cycle of retaliation feared. Local residents spoke to reporters, some saying they were exhausted by the violence, others insisting it was inevitable as long as the feuds and the music kept feeding each other. For investigators, it was another case in a long line of murders with roots in rap rivalries. But for McCormick's family, it was the singular loss of a son. The night of January 15th, 2020, was short in seconds, but long in impact. The gunfire that killed Charles McCormick rippled outward through his family's grief, through a rap community caught between art and violence, and through a courtroom where, years later, jurors would sit in silence as the details were replayed. It was the night that forever linked the name Lil Buck with the name K. So, when the gunfire stopped on January 15th, 2020, Charles Lil Buck McCormick was gone, but the investigation into his death had only just begun. Jacksonville Sheriff's Office detectives arrived within minutes of the shooting. Crime scene tape stretched across the Arlington block. Detectives knew immediately this was not a random act. The precision, the number of shots, and the fleeing vehicle described by witnesses all suggested something orchestrated. The first step was forensics. Crime scene technicians marked shell casings scattered across the pavement. Ballistics testing later confirmed that multiple firearms had been used, strengthening the theory that at least 2 shooters were involved. Investigators documented trajectories, measured distances, and photographed the scene. Every piece of evidence would later be presented to jurors in court, not as abstractions, but as hard physical proof. Fingerprints, DNA swabs, and even tire impressions near the scene were collected. While none of this immediately pointed to a specific suspect, the pattern fit with other recent shootings tied to Jacksonville's ongoing, rap-related rivalries. Detectives canvassed the area for cameras. In 2020, businesses and residences increasingly had security systems, and investigators knew to look for them. Within days, they recovered surveillance footage from convenience stores and traffic cameras in the Arlington area. The video showed a vehicle trailing the gray Nissan Altima shortly before the gunfire. Though the resolution was grainy, investigators narrowed the model down and began cross-referencing it with vehicles known to be used by associates of the ATK crew. Phone records were another key piece. Prosecutors later revealed that cell site data placed Hakeem K., Ksoo Robinson, and his cousin, Leroy ATK Scotty Whitaker, in the area of the shooting. The combination of surveillance and digital evidence allowed investigators to track movements. In the crucial minutes before and after McCormick's death, witness statements. In addition to physical evidence, detectives relied on people. Some witnesses heard the gunfire or saw shadows fleeing the scene. Others were more complicated individuals tied to the same street networks that fueled the violence. Over the months following the murder, information trickled in. Some of it was unreliable, but eventually, investigators received testimony pointing directly to Robinson and Whitaker. The most shocking development came later. Abdul Robinson, Sr., Ksoo's own father, would cooperate with prosecutors. He admitted knowledge of his son's role in the crime and, under oath, placed him at the center of the murder plot.
Who is the person that was captured on the video recording shooting Charles McCormick?
My son,
What's your son's name?
Hakeem.
Is this easy for you to do?
No, this is the hardest thing I ever had to do in my life.
It was an extraordinary and deeply personal twist. Court observers later noted they had never seen a parent testify against their child in a murder trial of this scale. By March 2020, detectives felt they had enough to move. Arrest warrants were signed. Robinson and Whitaker were both charged, initially with second-degree murder. Prosecutors upgraded the charge against Robinson to first-degree murder after presenting evidence to a grand jury. The decision signaled confidence. This wasn't going to be a case built on speculation or circumstantial ties alone. The state was preparing for a full trial, one that would bring in forensics, surveillance, phone records, and the testimony of family and associates. Still, the case was far from simple. Defense attorneys for Robinson quickly pointed out weaknesses. No murder weapon was ever recovered, directly tying him to the shooting. Surveillance video, while suggestive, was grainy. Witness testimony, particularly from individuals with criminal backgrounds, could be challenged as unreliable, or prosecutors had something else, a narrative that tied together evidence and motive. They framed Robinson as both a rapper and an active participant in Jacksonville's deadly feuds, a man whose music and actions blurred into one. To jurors, they would argue the dots connected. By late 2020, the outlines of the case against Hakeem Ksoo Robinson were clear. A young rapper rising in Jacksonville's scene now faced the possibility of life in prison. At the heart of the evidence was not only technology and forensics, but blood ties, a father's testimony against his son. It was a case that blended the old tools of policing with the new realities of digital surveillance and online rap rivalries. And it was about to head into a courtroom where every piece would be tested. By the time Hakeem Ksoo Robinson's case reached trial, Jacksonville had already been buzzing for years. The rapper, once seen as a rising star, was now facing a first-degree murder charge. Accused of gunning down 23-year-old Charles "Lil Buck" McCormick Jr., it wasn't just the crime that drew attention. It was the players. The defendant was a local rap figure with a growing fan base. The victim was a young man with family and friends demanding justice. And then there was the extraordinary witness, Robinson's own father, Abdul Robinson Sr. The courtroom atmosphere, the Duval County Courthouse, became the stage. Reporters lined up early each morning, while spectators filled the benches behind the attorneys. Some were supporters of Ksoo, hoping he might somehow beat the case. Others were McCormick's relatives, clutching tissues, determined to see justice served. Security was tight. Given Robinson's connections to local street feuds, deputies kept a close watch on who entered and exited the courtroom. Tension simmered in the air. At times, it felt less like a routine trial and more like a community reckoning. The prosecution's opening was blunt. Hakeem Robinson hunted down Charles McCormick and executed him. One state attorney told jurors, this was no accident. This was no mistake. It was a targeted killing carried out as part of a violent feud in our city. They promised jurors surveillance video, phone data, and testimony from insiders, including the defendant's own father, that would prove Robinson's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense countered by urging caution. Robinson's attorneys argued that the state's case was built on circumstantial evidence and unreliable witnesses. There is no direct proof that Mr. Robinson pulled the trigger, they insisted. No gun, no DNA, no clear footage. The prosecution wants you to take the word of people with their own reasons to lie. The battle lines were drawn. Over the next several days, prosecutors rolled out their case, piece by piece. Surveillance footage showed a vehicle trailing the Nissan Altima shortly before McCormick was killed. Cell site records placed Robinson and his cousin, Leroy ATK Scotty Whitaker, near the crime scene that night. Prosecutors called phone data digital witnesses, unbiased and precise. Ballistics analysis confirmed multiple shooters were involved, consistent with the theory that Robinson and Whitaker acted together. Each piece alone wasn't enough to convict. Together, prosecutors argued, they formed a mosaic pointing directly to Ksoo. The moment came midway through the trial, and the courtroom grew still. Deputies escorted in Abdul Robinson Sr., shackled at the wrists and ankles. He was already facing federal charges of his own, part of a sprawling racketeering case that targeted members of the Robinson family. Taking the stand against his son was unthinkable for many. But prosecutors told jurors that Abdul Sr. had agreed to testify truthfully in hopes of reducing his own exposure. Under oath, he described conversations and knowledge tying Hakeem Robinson to McCormick's killing. Reporters noted that jurors leaned in, listening closely. The gravity of a father testifying against his child was not lost on anyone in the room. When asked why he was cooperating, Robinson Sr. paused. Because the truth has to come out, he said. The defense seized on his criminal background, painting him as a man trying to save himself at his son's expense. You'll say anything to get a lighter sentence, won't you? Defense counsel pressed. Abdul Sr. denied lying, but the exchange left jurors to weigh credibility against the extraordinary nature of his testimony. On the other side of the courtroom, Charles McCormick's mother sat silently through each day of testimony. When the prosecution rested its case, she finally spoke through a victim impact statement. My son's life mattered. He was more than a headline. Her words underscored what was at stake. Not just legal arguments, but the human cost of the violence tearing through Jacksonville. The trial was no longer just about whether the evidence was strong enough. It had become a story of loyalty, betrayal, and truth. A father against a son. A grieving family demanding accountability. A jury caught between conflicting narratives. In the coming days, the jurors would have to decide whether the mosaic the state had presented was clear enough to convict. The trial of Hakeem Ksoo Robinson stretched over days, but the weight of years hung on every word. Witnesses had spoken, evidence had been laid out, and both sides had delivered their closing arguments. Now the power shifted to 12 jurors, ordinary citizens asked to decide the fate of a young man whose life had once seemed destined. For music charts instead of a courtroom, prosecutors told jurors to look at the case as a whole, not as scattered pieces. You've seen the footage. You've heard the phone records. You've listened to a father testify against his son, the lead state attorney said. When you put it all together, there is only one conclusion. Hakeem Robinson murdered Charles McCormick. The defense urged jurors to resist the pull of emotion. There is no murder weapon. The videos are blurry. And the state's key witness is a man with every reason to lie, his own father, facing his own charges. Robinson's attorney argued, "Do not convict on speculation." The jury was sent to deliberate. The courthouse hallways were tense. Robinson sat at the defense table, expression guarded, sometimes staring at the floor. His relatives clustered in the gallery, exchanging whispers. On the opposite side, McCormick's family clutched one another, praying silently. Hours stretched into a day. Then the word came. The jury had reached a decision. On the afternoon of October 2024 date, from court reporting, the jurors filed back into the courtroom. Everyone rose as the foreperson handed the verdict form to the bailiff. The judge scanned it, then read aloud. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Hakeem Robinson, guilty of first-degree murder." Gasps broke the silence. McCormick's family wept, some collapsing into each other's arms. On the other side, Robinson's supporters sat stunned, shaking their heads. Robinson himself showed little visible reaction. Reporters later wrote that he remained stone-faced, jaw tight, as if refusing to give the public the satisfaction of emotion. Because the charge was first-degree murder, the punishment was automatic. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. At the sentencing hearing, McCormick's mother addressed the court. Her voice broke as she spoke directly to Robinson. "You took away my son, and you took away his future. My heart is broken, and it will never be whole again. I hope one day you understand the pain you've caused." Robinson declined to speak. His attorneys simply noted their intent to appeal. The verdict sent ripples through Jacksonville. For McCormick's family, there was relief that justice had been served, though no sentence could return their son. For Robinson's supporters, the conviction was another reminder of how quickly a promising music career could collapse under the weight of street realities. In the rap world, the case reignited debates about the blurred lines between music and violence. Some said Robinson's fate was proof that the diss track era had gone too far, with real lives lost behind the lyrics. Others argued he had been unfairly targeted by prosecutors eager to make an example out of a rising rapper. But in the end, the jury had spoken. The guilty verdict closed one chapter, but opened many questions about Jacksonville's cycle of retaliation, about the price of loyalty and betrayal, about what it means for a father to testify against a son. For Charles, Lil Buck, McCormick's family, it was the closest thing to closure they would ever get. For Hakeem Ksoo Robinson, it was the end of freedom and the beginning of life behind bars. The guilty verdict against Hakeem Ksoo Robinson was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of another phase. The courtroom drama might have concluded, but the fallout spread into appeals courts, the streets of Jacksonville, and the broader hip-hop world where fans debated what the case symbolized. Immediately after sentencing, Robinson's defense attorneys filed a notice of intent to appeal. Their arguments focused on the reliability of the state's evidence. Witness credibility, they challenged the testimony of Robinson's father, pointing out his pending charges and the possibility that he testified to help himself. Surveillance quality, they argued that the video evidence was too blurry to definitively identify Robinson. Lack of murder weapon, no firearm was ever recovered that could be tied directly to him. Legal experts noted that while appeals were routine in murder cases, Overturning a first-degree murder conviction would be an uphill battle. Unless there was a clear procedural error, the verdict was likely to stand. In Jacksonville, the case became a symbol of the city's struggles. Residents in Arlington and other neighborhoods where the feud simmered said McCormick's death and Robinson's conviction highlighted the deadly consequences of ongoing rivalries. Some community leaders applauded the life sentence, saying it sent a message that the cycle has to stop. Others worried it was just another chapter in an endless chain of violence. One young man dead, another spending life in prison, both families broken. At candlelight vigils for McCormick, relatives repeated the same refrain: "We want peace. We don't want more retaliation." The good, the bad, and the ugly of the Ksoo Robinson case. The story of Hakeem Ksoo Robinson and Charles Lil Buck McCormick Jr. is one of triumph, tragedy, and caution. Across Jacksonville, it touched families, friends, fans, and communities in ways that extended far beyond a single night of violence. The good, even amid tragedy, some positives emerged. Justice served. The guilty verdict offered the McCormick family a measure of closure. While no verdict can undo a loss, the courtroom affirmed that actions have consequences. Awareness raised, the case sparked discussion about cycles of violence, the risks of glorifying retaliation, and the need for community intervention. Schools, churches, and advocacy groups used it as a teaching moment for youth. Legal precedent. Robinson's trial added to the ongoing debate over the admissibility of lyrics and persona in criminal trials, shaping conversations that may influence future cases. The bad, the case also revealed deep structural issues. The loss of life and potential. Charles McCormick's life was cut short, and Hakeem Robinson's future as a rapper and young man was effectively ended by a life sentence. Community fear and division. The trial exposed tensions in neighborhoods, dividing fans, families, and friends. Retaliation remained a real concern, highlighting the ongoing struggle with street violence in Jacksonville. Blurred lines between art and reality. The use of Robinson's music as evidence reflected a broader cultural problem. When does creative expression become perceived as confessional? The ugly, finally, the story's most painful lessons are the raw, unavoidable truths. Betrayal within families. Abdul Robinson, Sr.'s testimony against his son shocked the community and tore the family apart. A moment that underscored the human cost of legal strategy and survival. The cycle of violence continues. Despite one conviction, feuds, rivalry, and street conflicts persisted in Jacksonville, ensuring that tragedies like this were unlikely to end with one verdict. Media and myth-making. The rapid transformation of Ksoo's name into both legend and warning sign illustrates the dangers of mythologizing crime and criminals, sometimes at the expense of victims. The Ksoo case is a cautionary tale in every sense. Talent does not shield one from consequences. Art cannot always be separated from reality when the stakes are life and death. Families are never immune from the fallout of crime, whether as victims, perpetrators, or witnesses. Communities must address the underlying conditions: poverty, lack of opportunity, and systemic neglect that allow cycles of violence to persist. Ksoo will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Lil Buck will never get the chance to grow, dream, or create. And Jacksonville remains a city grappling with the consequences of violence. Fame and cultural expression intertwined in ways that will echo for generations. In the end, the story is not black and white. There is no single villain or hero, only choices and consequences. The Ksoo case reminds us that behind headlines, hashtags, and rap lyrics are real lives, lives lost, lives imprisoned, and lives changed forever. It is a story of the good, the bad, and the ugly, a stark reflection of human ambition, vulnerability, and the consequences of crossing the line between art and action.